Right, welcome happy campers to a tutorial on the PMDG 737. All I'm going to do today is show you the startup procedures. I'm not going to do checklists because you can use those on your own in your own time. So all I'm going to show you is the startup procedure to get the engines fired up once you've got clearance from ATC. So as you can see, we're cold and dark. The whole aircraft is shut down. So first thing you do is go up to the overhead panel, and here you turn on the battery. So you just close the switch cover, and that's our battery on. So you can see we've got power to the aircraft now. 7 amps up there, 28 volts running in. So the second item on the agenda is our emergency exit lights. So we're going to shut that so that it turns on the emergency lights. And those are the first two things you do from a cold and dark perspective. So we're running on the battery now. So if we leave this as it is, we'll eventually run out of battery power and the plane will go back to cold and dark. And you'd then have to get your engineers to recharge the battery or replace it. So we don't want that to happen. So we've got one or two choices. We can either set up ground power, and I'll show you how to do that, or we start the APU, which is what I'm going to do in this instance. I'll show you both. So if we go down to the FMC, you'll see in here you've got PMDG setup and FS actions, and by the way, this is where you set up your cold and start state, and I've got mine permanently to cold and dark state. You can load a panel state, any of these states, and then you can also save a panel state, which is what I've done, save to startup state. But I digress. So back to here, you've got FS actions, and in here you've got your fuel planner, your fuel load, and then you've got your payload where you set your passengers and your cargo and that up. And then you've got ground connections. Now this is where you would configure your ground connections. So our pitot cover's on already, and our wheel chocks are set. So I'll configure ground power now. While it's off, if you look up here, you'll see the ground power option up there. The switch isn't lit. It doesn't do anything. So if I set it up from here now, configure the ground power, then you can see now it's lit up and now it's available. So if I click it, we're now on ground, and you can hear the aircon kicking in, etc. So we're on ground power now, and I could then carry on configuring the aircraft. In here you can also set the conditioning unit and the air conditioning and the air start unit on. So, but we're not going to use ground power, so I'm going to disable all of those. So I've turned off the ground power. I'll leave pitot covers and wheel chocks on. If you're using GSX, then you'll be prompted to take the chocks off before pushback. But if you're not using GSX, you need to remember to remove the wheel chocks before you push back. So we're not using ground power. You can see it's off there. So we're going to start the APU up now. So if you do use ground power, remember before you do your pushback, you would have to start your APU before you turn the ground power off, so that you've got juice in the plane when you do your pushback for engine startup. So I'm going to go ahead and start the APU. So I click it to on, and then I click it to start, and you can hear the click of the APU. And if you watch this gauge, the APU gauge, you'll see it'll rise all the way to the end, and then it'll drop back to about 4. So there we go. It's started up now, and this takes about 30 seconds or so to start the APU. And there's a setting in the PMDG options where you set your cold and dark, and that you'll see an option in the PMDG aircraft options to set up the long APU option, which is about 3.5 minutes. That's the realistic APU startup time. Or you can set it to the short time, which is about 30 seconds, which is what I've got it set to. Or I believe you can set it to instant as well. It comes on straight away, but I prefer to have a little bit of realism. So I set it to 30 seconds. 3 minutes is a bit long, and it's ridiculous to set for 3 minutes in a sim to wait. So the APU's on now. So now I click the APU generator buttons. So that starts the APU generators, and you can see the lights have gone off on the APU indicators now. So we're on APU power, and that's now providing power to the engine, to the aircraft. And we can now continue the rest of the procedures. So I usually start my lights now, the logo, beacon lights, strobe lights, etc. And then I'll pop the engine selector switch to both, just so we're ready on that for engine startup. And what I'll do, because we've got APU now, you would generally go and configure your flight plan and get clearance from ATC, and then set your aircraft up and get ready to go. So once you are ready to go, you would request startup pushback clearance, and then you can obviously go and start up the engines. So we're on APU power, we're running on APU. And oh yes, so the other thing you want to do is to set your IRS, your ADAIRS. So that's up these two knobs up here. So you would set the two of them to align, and then wait till they show align, and there we go, they're aligned. And then you would set them on, change them on to nav, as you can see as I've done there. So I think there's a slightly reduced time from the time it normally takes to align the RS. But then if you come down to the FMC and you go to the position initialization, you'll be able to see you can set your position now. So you click on the airport position, then click on the entry points, and you'll see in a few seconds, your PFD and your primary and secondary PFD will flare into life. So there we go, they've now both flared into life, and they're calibrated on the GPS. Takes a little time to align the RS, 20 seconds or so, but you can then set your FMC position so that the aircraft knows exactly where you are, so it can plot your course when you configure your route in the FMC. So that's the aircraft setup ready now. Apart from the MCP, you would set your flight level to either your initial cleared level from ATC, or if you're flying on VATSIM on Unicom, then obviously you would just configure your cleared flight level, your cruise level in there. And then I'll also set my max speed to 250, because that's the maximum you can fly under 10,000 feet in the UK. And your heading you would configure to runway heading, which in this case at Newcastle is runway 25, so that's 250. Then you would start your flight directors, configure those, and then back up to the overhead panel, and we're ready to start the engine now. Well, both engines now, in fact. So the important things to note for engine start is that your engine packs need to be off. So those two engine pack switches need to be either off or they can be in the auto position, but I prefer them to be off myself, so I know they're off. Isolation valve stays open, recircs stay on auto as they are, and then down at the bottom your APU bleed needs to be on. So we're in position now, ready to start. We've got our engine selector switch set to both, so that's fine. And if we look down on the flight displays, you can see your engine levels, your N1 and your N2 engine levels on the indicators down here. So that's what we're going to watch once we start our engines. So once we've got, at this point, we'd get our startup and pushback clearance, and once we've got that, then we will look to start the engine. If you're using GSX, at this you would wait till your ground engineer has given you clearance to start up. The engines are clear, no one's going to get sucked in. So we'd flip our ground knob to ground, or our engine startup knob for engine 2 to ground, and then we're going to be watching the N2 selector until it gets to about 17 to 22, and then you want to flick your fuel selector or your fuel cutoff valve open. So once you flip that, then the engine flow will continue until it's stabilized at full power. So if you don't flip that switch, then the engine flow will stop at about 28, 29, and your engine will not start until you open the fuel valves to allow fuel to enter the engine. So we can see the engine starting now. The N1 is rising now, and once that's stabilized, there we go, we've just heard a click. So if we go back up to the top, you can see the engine ignition switch is now turned to off, so we're ready to go for engine 2. We do exactly the same procedure, turn to the knob to ground, and then watch the startup flow. The N2 flows rising. Once that gets to 17 or so, then we're going to flip the fuel cutoff switch, and that engine's on its way. So now we just wait for that to stabilize as well, and that's pretty much it for the actual startup procedure. So once that's stabilized, the second engine stabilized, then there's a couple of things we need to configure on the overhead, which I'll show you in a second. So we're just waiting for the click of that engine selector going back to ground, and once that happens, then we will back to norm position, and then once that happens, we will pop up. There we go. Let's just click back. So the two engines are now stabilized and look good. So now what we do is we move the engine selectors to continuous, and then we set the yaw damper on, and we turn our engine packs on or to auto, as you can see, and then we'd go down and turn our APU bleed off. So that's that panel configured and ready. So what you would then do is turn your window heat on and your probes. You can do this earlier if you want, but it doesn't really matter when you turn them on. Now then you turn your electric hydraulics on, and I should really have turned this on at the start, but not to worry, I should have turned them on before the engine starts. You can see a light below that which is forward entry, means I've got a door open. So when you're in cold and dark, it always leaves a door open. So we'll go to the door section in the on the FMC, and you can see the doors open there. We just close it, and that will close now, and the light will go out. So that's all done. This is your flight level altitude for cabin pressure. So you configure that to whatever your cruise altitude is. so that the plane knows which pressure levels you're going to be flying at, and configure itself for that. And you would then turn your fuel pumps on, and again, I would normally turn these on before I start the engines, but in this case I haven't. So you turn the center ones on if you have enough fuel to use them, because the center tanks empty before the wing tanks. So if you've only got enough fuel to fill the wing tanks and not the center tanks, you would leave those off. And also, if you're on a longer flight, then you'll see the low pressure indicators come on at some point in the flight where the center tanks are exhausted of fuel, and you would then turn those switches off to remove the warning signs and close the pumps. So all that's left to do now is to shut down the APU. So what we do first is we turn on the engine generators, which is those two switches there. So now the engine is providing the electricity to the aircraft, and you can see the APU lights are lit up now, showing that the APU is off but available. So you just flick the switch to off on the APU, and you'll see the lights go off. So now on our panel we have no orange lights, no warning lights, nothing that indicates an issue. So you can now set things like seatbelt fastening and chimes and equipment cooling or anti-ice if it's really cold. So you can turn engine anti-ice or wing anti-ice on if you need to, if it's freezing conditions. You would know if it was cold enough for anti-ice if you nip down and have a look on your flight displays. Shows you the temperature there, so 17 degrees at the moment, but if it's down at I think I'm not sure offhand what the temperature trigger is for anti-ice, but I would imagine it's 5 or 10 degrees Celsius. But it does give you an ice indicator warning on that display anyway, when it's cold enough for anti-ice, and then you would just turn it on. It's obviously colder higher up, so as you climb, you'd find the icing is more of a problem, and you'd need to keep an eye on the temperatures and turn on anti-ice when you need to. So now you would arm auto throttle. That can disarm if you engage auto throttle, reverse throttle. So just keep an eye on that. If sometimes you can activate that by mistake if you pull the throttles down too far back, and I'll show you that actually. So there we go. I've just engaged reverse thrusters, and auto throttle is disengaged, so I just flick it back on. So just keep an eye that you haven't accidentally removed auto throttle. It does give you a warning, so you should notice anyway. So that's pretty much it. We're all set. So at this point, you either configure FMC, or you would have configured that before pushback. And but the plane's now set up and ready to go. So that's pretty much it for engine start. We're now in a startup state and ready to go. So we've got some overwing open warning lights, but I'm not going to worry too much about that. I think I've just activated something with one of the knobs, but not to worry. It's those wouldn't normally be on. I've just bumped them on. So that's your engine start. I hope you've enjoyed the tutorial. It's not as difficult as it seems once you get the hang of which systems control which bits of the aircraft and how it all pieces together. So thanks for watching and happy flying. I hope to see you on the next one.